Yeah, I think
11. They passed the morning pleasantly, getting accustomed to two of Maid Marian's bows. Robin had insisted on this, saying that no man could shoot with another's bow any more than he could cut with another's scythe. For their midday meal, they had cold venison patty with mead, as also did everybody else. The outlaws drifted in for the meal like a conjuring trick. At one moment, there would be nobody on the edge of the clearing. At the next, half a dozen right inside it. Green or sunburned men who had silently materialized out of the bracken or the trees. In the end, there were about 100 of them, eating merrily and laughing. The food was dished out from a leafy bower, where Marian and her attendants cooked. The outlaws usually posted a sentry to take the tree messages and slept during the afternoon, partly because so much of their hunting had to be done in the times when most workmen sleep, and partly because generally the wild beasts take a nap in the afternoon, and so should their hunters. This afternoon, however, Robin called them to council. "Now, men," he said when they had assembled, "you know about these anthropophagi, and how we have lost Matthew, Peter, Walter, Colin, and many others. God rest their souls. You know how Guido found their nest last week. Tonight, the anthropophagi are holding one of their feasts of sacrifice, and it behooves us to slay them at it." All the men made a deep murmur at this. "I have much to tell you, men," continued Robin, "and the success of our plan, certainly, the safety of all our lives, possibly, depends upon you listening. You know the anthropophagi and how many varieties they have. The Scythians, who wrap themselves in their ears, can hear a twig break half a mile away. The Pitonese, who live by smell, can detect a man upwind for 3 miles. The Nysites, with 3 or 4 eyes, can distinguish the faintest movement anywhere. All these men, or beasts if you prefer to call them so, are wild, ferocious, and desperate. They are armed with poison arrows. Many of them, particularly the Cyopodes, are much swifter of foot than we can ever be. Our chances are small. Men, our hope is to take them by surprise. If we can surround them in the darkness while their attention is all concentrated upon the fires of their sacrifice, we may be able to get within bowshot without being heard or scented or seen. Then, while they stand in firelight and we in gloom, the difference between poisoned arrows and English cloth yards will be evened up. It is a dastardly way to fight. None of us likes it. But remember that these creatures are poisonous and cannibals. At that very moment, they will be preparing to eat 2 servants of our neighbor, Sir Ector. Remember also that on their own ground they are invincible, that our only hope of ourselves escaping from their slow decimation is by surprise. Will be difficult enough, considering their acute senses, even to surround them. This will need all our woodcraft. They must be slaughtered, every one tonight. Not one wasp or adder, shall I call them, must escape our shafts. Now, men, there will be 5 troops. Their leaders will be Marian, John Little, Much the miller's son, Will Scathelock, and myself. Friar Tuck will stay at the tree as lookout. These 5 troops will move individually for the first stage, each man for himself, until we are met at the great oak that was struck in the storm year. That oak is 4 miles away from the nest, and downwind of it, as the air lies at present. We must hope it will not change. After the great oak, the men will separate into their bands, my own band and John Little's going 400 yards to the left and right. It will be dark by then. The other 3 bands will spread into a semicircle, and after giving us a start of 20 rosaries, will advance upon the nest upwind. Once more, and for the last time, I must warn every man that a Pittanese can smell 3 miles. The Scythians hear a twig at half a mile, and the Nysites see like hawks in every direction. My band and John Little's will be advancing on your wing, a few hundred yards in front. It will be the business of these 2 bands to close in upon the anthropophagy from the other side. It will be these bands who will be heard or scented sooner or later, for it will be their necessity to go upwind of the nest. We must hope that they will not be scented too soon. The other 3 bands will take up their stations on the downward side of the sacrificial fire, close enough for shooting point blank, but far enough to be invisible in the firelight. They will wait for news of my band and John's. If we manage to take up a good position on the other side undetected, I shall blow my horn. This will be the signal for all to fire. If we do not manage to take up a good position, disturb the anthropophagy, that disturbance may be also taken as an order to fire. We shall have to surround them then, each man for himself again, as best we may. These 2 boys will go with Marion's band. I think that is all. No, there is one thing. If you can distinguish them in the firelight, I want you to spare the Pittanese and the Indians. They are perfectly harmless. You know what they look like. That is all, men. Remember the silence of the woods and move like them. God bless us. Now then. As soon as Robin Wood had finished his speech, which was listened to in perfect silence, an odd thing happened. He began it again at the beginning and spoke it from the start to finish in exactly the same words. On finishing it for the second time, he said, "Now, Captain," and all those 100 men split into groups of 20, which went to different parts of the clearing and stood round Marion, Little John, Much, Scarlet, and Robin. From each of these little groups, a humming noise rose to the sky. "What on earth are they doing?" asked Kay. "Listen," said the wart. They were repeating the speech, word for word. Probably none of them could read or write, but they had learned to listen and to remember. This was the way in which Robin kept touch with his raiders by night, by knowing that each man knew by heart all that the leader himself knew, and why he was able to trust them, when necessary, to move each man by himself. When all the men had repeated their instructions, and every one was word perfect in that long speech, there was an issue of war arrows, a dozen to each man. These arrows had bigger heads, ground to razor sharpness, and they were heavily feathered in a square cut. There was a bow inspection, and 2 or 3 men were issued with new strings. Then all fell silent. "Now then," cried Robin cheerfully. He waved his arms in a generous gesture, and the men, smiling, raised their bows in salute. Then there was a sigh, a rustle, a snap of one incautious twig, and the clearing of the giant lime tree was as empty as it had been before the days of man. "Come with me," said Marion, touching the boys on the shoulder. Behind them, the bees hummed in the leaves. It was a long march and a tedious one. The artificial glades which converged upon the lime tree in the form of a cross were no longer of use after the first half hour. After that, they had to make their way through the virgin forest as best they might. It would not have been so bad if they had been able to kick and slash their way through it, but they were supposed to move in silence. Maid Marian showed them how to go sideways, one side after the other, how to stop at once when a bramble caught them and take it patiently out, how to put their feet down sensitively and then roll their weight to that leg as soon as they were certain that no twig was under the foot, how to distinguish at a glance the places which gave most hope of an easy passage, and how a kind of rhythm in their movements would help them in spite of all these obstacles. Although there were 100 invisible men on every side of them, moving towards the same goal, they heard no sounds but their own. The boys had felt a little disgruntled at first, at being put into Marion's band. They would have preferred to have gone with Robin, and thought that being put under Marion was like being entrusted to a governess. They soon found out their mistake. She had objected to their coming, but now that their coming was ordered, she accepted them as companions in war. Nor was it easy to be a companion of hers. In the first place, it was impossible to keep up with her unless she waited for them, for she could move on all fours or even wriggle like a snake almost as quickly as they could walk. And in the second place, she was an accomplished soldier, which they were not. One of the bits of advice which she gave them before talking had to be stopped was this: aim high when you shoot in war, rather than low. A low arrow strikes only the ground. A high one may kill in the second rank. If I am ever made to get married, sorry, if I'm ever made to get married, thought the wart, who had doubts on this subject, I will marry a girl like this, a kind of golden vixen. As a matter of fact, though the boys did not know it, Marion could hoot like an owl by blowing into her fists, or whistle that shrill blast between tongue and teeth with the fingers in the corner of the mouth, to bring all the birds to her by imitating their calls, and understand much of their small language, such as when the tits exclaim that a hawk is coming, could hit the popinjay twice for 3 times of Robin, and could turn cartwheels. But none of these accomplishments was necessary at the moment. The twilight fell mistily. It was the very first of the autumn mists, and in the dimity the undispersed families of the tawny owl called to each other, the young with "hee-week," and the old with the proper "hoo hoo." Proportionately, as the brambles and obstacles became harder to see, so did they become easier to feel. It was odd, but in the deepening silence, the wart found himself able to move more silently instead of the reverse. Being reduced to touch and sound, he found himself in better accord with these, and could go quietly and quick. It was about Compline, or as we should call it, at 9 o'clock at night, and they had covered at least 7 miles of that toilsome forest, when Marion touched Kay on the shoulder and pointed into the blue darkness. They could see in the dark now, as well as human beings can see in it, and much better than townspeople will ever manage to. And there in front of them, struck through 7 miles of trackless forest by might already be waiting there, would not know of their arrival. They crept. But a motionless man has always the advantage of a man in motion, and they had hardly reached the outskirts of the route when friendly hands took hold of them, patted their backs with pats as light as thistledown, and guided them to seats. The routes were crowded. It was like being a member of a band of starlings or of roosting rooks. In the night mystery, 100 men breathed on every side of Ward, like the surge of our own blood, which we can hear when we are sitting or reading in the late and lonely hours. They were in the dark and stilly womb of night. Presently, the wart noticed that the grasshoppers were creaking their shrill note, so tiny as to be almost extra audible, like the creak of the bat. They creaked one after another. They creaked when Marion had creaked thrice in order to account for Kay, and Wart, as well as for herself, 100 times. All the outlaws were present. It was time to go. There was a rustle, as if the wind had moved in the last few leaves of that 900-year-old oak. Then an owl hooted soft, a field mouse screamed, a rabbit thumped, a dog fox barked his deep, single lion's cough, and an airy mouse twittered above their heads. The leaves rustled again more lengthily, while you could count 100, and then Maid Marian, who had done the rabbit's thump, was surrounded by her band of 20 plus 2. The wart felt a man on either side of him take his hand as they stood in a circle, and then he noticed that the stridulation of the grasshoppers had begun again. It was going round in a circle towards him, and as the last grasshopper rubbed its legs together, the man on his right squeezed his hand. Wart stridulated. Instantly, the man on his left did the same and pressed his hand also. There were 22 grasshoppers before Maid Marian's band was ready for its last stalk of 4 miles through the silent forest. The last stalk might have been a nightmare, but to the wart it was heavenly. Suddenly, he found himself filled with an exultation of might, and felt that he was bodiless, silent, or transported. He felt that he could have walked upon a feeding rabbit and caught her up by the ears, furry and kicking, before she knew his presence. He felt that he could have run between the legs of the men on either side of him, or taken their bright daggers from their sheaths while they still moved on undreaming. The passion of nocturnal secrecy was a wine that triumphed in his blood. He really was small and young enough to move as secretly as the warriors. Their age and weight made them lumber, in spite of all their woodcraft, and his youth and lightness made him mobile, in spite of his lack of it. It was an easy stalk, except for its added danger. The bushes thinned out, and the sounding bracken grew rarely in the swampy earth, so that they could move 3 times as fast. They went in a dream, unguided by owl's hoot or bat's twitter, but only kept together by the necessary pace which the sleeping forest imposed upon them. Some of them were fearful, some revengeful for their lost comrades, some, as it were, disbodied in the horrible sleepwalk of their stealth. There was a glimmer in front of them, a rosy sunrise in the trees. There were noises and shadows that moved before it, something like a queer phantasmagoria village celebration, which have been seen in these late years of grace for jubilee and coronations. There was a clearing lit by firelight, and in its huts of mud, the round walls were saffron in the glow, beehives of light and darkness, and 3 stakes or spits stood in the center of the night. The wild men intended to roast poor Cavall, as well as the dog boy and Wat, and the 3rd stake was for him. Wart could see the firelight gleaming red from the coating of Maid Marian's eyes as she fitted the knock-up arrow to the string. But the people in the nest of anthropophagy were most strange than all. They were busy about their tasks of roasting, plainly visible to their slayers in the outer gloom. Some of their heads, growing beneath their shoulders, ran about their errands of torture with set expressions, like people intent upon something they have lost upon the ground. Others, with the heads of dogs, howled with slow, melodious accents before the fire. The pygmy Spythami, whose eternal enemies are the cranes, ran about with tiny logs for the roast, themselves only a few hands high. The Ethiopians, or Cyopodes, had only 1 foot, but this is so huge that they could use it. This is so huge that they could use it as a sunshade to protect themselves when sleeping. These creatures hopped on their single feet with incredible agility, like hares, landing on their heels and taking off with their toes in industrious bounds, which were directed towards conveying all the necessaries for the sacrifice. Some of the men had lower lips so large that they could cover their heads with them to keep off the rain. Others had 6 fingers or 8 toes. Others again, Nicites, were glaring in all directions from 4 eyes, bloodshot by the bonfire light, while the women among them had long beards that were quite bald. Perhaps the most curious of all these flame-fringed cannibals were the storkmen, creatures with beautiful human bodies, but the necks, heads, and beaks of the heron family. They moved before the hellish tapestry, poking their heads forwards and back, tick-tock like a metronome, as they balanced their beaks against the forward pace. In a far corner of the clearing, by a stream distant from all this business, the Indians and Pitonese, or Astones, were clustered. The former innocuous water mammals like manatees, who were covered with hair, had 6 hands, and lived only by browsing in the stream. The latter, a timid race, who had no mouths, but existed entirely upon what they smelt, and who could be slain by a stink. All these, with the Scythians, who were accustomed to wrap themselves up in their ears at night, moved in the strange light of the sacrificial flame. The boys lay and listened with their troop for a time which seemed eternity. They fitted their arrows to their strings, so that they would be ready to loose off at the very first note of Robin's horn, but no sound came. Only the cruel uproar of the nest came to them down the wind. They saw the poor dog boy and old Wat led out to their stakes, and Cavall also, howling dismally. He was terrified by the dog-headed men, whom he supposed to be demons. The dog boy seemed very angry and anxious to fight his captors in spite of his bonds, but old Wat did not know what was being done to him, and walked between 2 Scythians with a happy smile. He, unlike Cavall, believed that he was in the hands of angels. The huge ears of the Scythians, moving like wings, made him think this. The victims were tied to their stakes, and the faggots piled about them. Then the anthropophagy joined hands in a circle and began to prance round and round the sacrifice as if they were doing a Paul Jones. They shouted, squealed, hooted, honked, or barked as they pranced, according to the several natures of their heads. The storkmen jerked their sharp beaks backwards and forwards, quicker and quicker, looking very strange in their tallness as they skipped, perhaps hand in hand with one of the pygmies. The Ciopodes went kerthump, kerthump, bounding on their huge and single feet. It was a terrible spectacle. The Wart was watching one of the Nicites, who appeared to be the leader of the band, partly on account of his enormous size and 4 red eyes, partly because he carried the sacrificial bow which would be used to dispatch the victims as soon as their faggots had been truly lit. When the Paul Jones stopped of its own accord, there had been no sound of movement which the outlaws could distinguish, but suddenly the dance was stilled. For a moment the Nicites shaded all their eyes and frowned into the darkness on the other side of the clearing, while the Scythians, unfolding their elephant ears, stood in black silhouettes and waved them sensitively in the same direction. Then the poor Pitonese, or Astones, huddled at the far end of the settlement, and taking no parts in these barbaric orgies, set up a dreadful wail through their twitching noses and stampeded. There were shrieks and a terrible din of animal voices. On top of the uproar, and riding on it proudly like the voice of an Arabian bird, Robin Wood's fierce horn of silver began to blow. Went the horn, and again Robin was blowing his hunting music, and now all the ambushed archers leaped. They set forward their left foot to the same movement and let fly such a shower of arrows as it had been snow. The wart saw the leader of the Nysites stagger in his tracks, a cloth-yard shaft suddenly sprouting from between his shoulder blades. He saw his own arrow fly wide of a crane man and eagerly bent forward to snatch another from the ground. Each man of the waiting troop had stuck his 12 arrows point downwards in the ground before him for convenience in loading. He saw the ranks of his companion archers sway forward as if by a preconcerted signal. When each man stooped for a second shaft, he heard the bowstrings twang again, the purr of the feathers in the air. He saw the phalanx of arrows gleam like an eye flick in the firelight. All his life up to then, he had been shooting into straw targets which made a noise like "fut." He had often longed to hear the noise that these gay, true, clean, and deadly missiles of the air would make in solid flesh. He heard it. The anthropophagi were yelling, falling, and running about. Some had snatched up their poisonous bows and were firing wildly into the dark. Others, strangely transfixed, were trembling with their ears pinned to their bodies or their lips to their chests. The pygmies scuttled for the huts. The Scythians made a trumpeting noise and charged the dark. They ran madly upon their assailant, but stumbled, coughed, or barked, and fell on their faces or sat down backwards in a few yards. As they leaped out, the arrows leaped to meet them. The Sciopodes, more swift in flight, bounded towards the sheltering darkness and skipped of 20 or 30 feet. One of them was coming straight at the wart. He could see the pointed ears, the wild eyes slit like a cat's, and the one huge foot by whose action it bounded. It squealed as it came and let fly one of its poisoned arrows at random. It saw the wart and leaped into the air like a kangaroo. The wart was fitting an arrow to his bow. The cock feather would not go right. Everything was in slow motion once again. He saw the huge body flying blackly through the glare, felt the foot take him in the chest. He felt himself turning somersaults slowly, and the cruel weight of the body turning somersaults on top of him. He saw Kay's face somewhere in the cartwheel of the universe, flushed with flame-lit excitement. It made Marian's on the other side, with its mouth open, shouting something. He thought, before he slid into blackness, that it was shouting something nice. "12. He picked the wart out from under the Sciopode and found his arrow sticking through its chest. It had died in its leap. Wart was unconscious, and the battle was over. Then there was a time which made him feel sick. While Robin set his broken collarbone and made him a sling out of the green cloth of his hood, and after that all lay down indiscriminately to sleep, dog-tired, among the slain. The wart lay propped against a tree. It was too late to get back to the castle that night, or even to get back to the outlaws' camp by the lime tree. All that could be done was to make up the fires, post sentries, and sleep where they were. Wart did not sleep much. He leaned against his tree, watching the red sentries pass to and fro in the firelight, hearing their quiet passwords and thinking about the excitements of the day. These went round and round in his head, sometimes losing their proper order and happening backwards or by bits. He saw the leaping Sciopod, heard Marian shouting, "Good shot!" listened to the humming of the bees muddled up with the stridulation of the grasshoppers, and shot hundreds and hundreds of times at popinjays, which turned into Sciopodes. Kay and the liberated dog boy slept twitching beside him, looking alien and incomprehensible as people do when they are asleep, and Cavall, lying at his good shoulder, occasionally licked his hot cheeks. The dawn came slowly, so slowly and pausingly that it was quite impossible to determine when it really had dawned, as is its habit during the summer months. "Well," said Robin, when they had all wakened and eaten the breakfast of bread and cold venison which they had brought with them, "you will have to love us and leave us, Kay. Otherwise I shall have Sir Ector fitting out an expedition against me to fetch you back. Thank you both for your help. Can I give you any little present as a reward for it?" "It has been lovely," said Kay. "Absolutely lovely. Can I have the Scythian I shot?" "He will be a bit heavy to carry. Why not just take his head?" "That would do," said Kay. "If somebody wouldn't mind cutting it off. It was that Scythian there." "What are you going to do about old Wat?" asked the ward. "It depends on his preferences. Perhaps he will like to run off by himself and eat acorns, as he used to do. Or if he likes to join our band, we shall be glad of him. He ran away from your village in the first place, so I don't suppose he will care to go back there. What do you think?"
"If you are going to give me a present," said the wart slowly, "I should like to have him. You think that would be all right?"
"As a matter of fact," said Robin, "I don't. I don't think I can very well give people as presents. They might not like it. What did you intend to do with him?"
"Oh, I don't want to keep him or anything like that. You see, we have a tutor who is a pretty good magician, and I thought he might be able to restore Wat to his wits."
"Good boy," said Robin. "Have him by all means. I'm sorry I made a mistake. At least we'll ask him if he would like to go." When somebody had gone off to fetch Wat, Robin said, "You had better talk to him yourself." They brought the poor old man, smiling, confused, piteous, and very dirty, and stood him up before Robin. "Go on," said Robin. The wart did not know quite how to put it, but he said,
"I say, Wat, would you like to come home with me, please? Just for a little."
"No, no, no, Warababa!" said Wat, pulling his forelock, smiling, bowing, and gently waving his arms in various directions.
"Come with me?"
"No, no, 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 water!"
"Dinner?" asked the wart in desperation. "Yum, yum?"
"Yum, yum!"
cried the poor creature affirmatively, and his eyes glowed with pleasure at the prospect of being given something to eat. "That way," said the wart, pointing in the direction which he knew the sun to be that of his guardian's castle. "Dinner. Come with, I take."
"Meester!"
said Wat, suddenly remembering just one word, the word which he had always been accustomed to offer to the great people who made him a present of food, his only livelihood. It was concluded.
"Well," said Robin, "it has been a good adventure, and I'm sorry you're going. I hope I shall see you again one day."
"Come any time," said Marian. "If you are feeling bored, you have only to follow those glade. And you, Wart, be careful of that collarbone for a few days."
"I will send some men with you to the edge of the chase," said Robin. "After that you must go by yourselves. I expect Dogboy can carry the Scythian's head."
"Goodbye," said Kay.
"Goodbye," said Robin.
"Goodbye," said the wart. "Goodbye," said Marian, smiling. and always shoot like you did last night."
"Goodbye!"
cried all the outlaws, waving their bows. And Kay and the Wart and the dog boy and Wat and Cavall and their escort set off on the long track home. They had an immense reception. The return on the previous day of all the hounds, except Cavall and the dog boy, and in the evening the failure to return of Kay and the Wart, had set the household in an uproar. Their nurse had gone into hysterics. Hob had stayed out till midnight scouring the earliest of the forest, and the cooks had burnt the joint for dinner. And the sergeant at arms had polished all their armor twice and sharpened all the swords and axes to a razor blade in expectation of an immediate invasion. At last somebody had thought of consulting Merlin, whom they had found in the middle of his third nap. The magician, for the sake of peace and quietness to go on with his nap in, had used his insight to tell Sir Ector exactly what the boys were doing, where they were, and when they might be expected to come back. He had prophesied their return to a minute. So, when the small procession of returning warriors came within sight of the drawbridge, they were greeted by the entire household. Sir Ector was standing in the middle with a thick walking stick with which he proposed to whack them for going out of bounds and causing so much trouble. The nurse had insisted on bringing out a banner which used to be put up when Sir Ector came home for the holidays as a small boy, and this said, "Welcome home." Hob had forgotten all about his beloved hawks and was standing on one side, shading his eagle eyes to get the first view. The cooks and all the kitchen staff were banging pots and pans and singing, "Will ye no come back again?" out of tune. The kitchen cat was yowling. The hounds had escaped from the kennel because there was nobody to look after them and were preparing to chase the kitchen cat. The sergeant at arms was blowing out his chest with pleasure so far that he looked as if he might burst at any moment, and was commanding everybody in a very important voice to get ready to cheer when he said, "1, 2." "1, 2," cried the sergeant. "Huzzah!" cried everybody obediently, including Sir Ector. "Look what I've got!" shouted Kay. "I've got a Scythian, and the Wart has been wounded." "No, no, no," barked all the hounds, and poured over the dog boy, licking his face, scratching his chest, sniffing him all over to see what he had been up to, and looking hopefully at the Scythian's head, which the dog boy held high in the air so that they could not eat it. "Bless my soul!" exclaimed Sir Ector. "Alas, the poor Philip Sparrow!" cried the nurse, dropping her banner. "Pity his poor arm all to brast in a green sling. God bless him!" "It's all right," said the Wart. "Ah, don't catch hold of me. It hurts." "May I have it stuffed?" asked Kay. "Well, I'll be dommed," said Hob. "Ain't thick would copy our walk. The earth run lunatical." "My dear, dear boys," said Sir Ector, "I am so glad to see you back." "Wood Chucklehead," exclaimed the nurse triumphantly, "where be thy girt cudgel now?"
"Hum," said Sir Ector. "How dare you go out of bounds and put us all to this anxiety?"
"It's a real Scythian," said Kay, who knew there was nothing to be afraid of. "I shot dozens of them. Wart shot a Cyopod and broke his collarbone. We rescued the dog boy and Wat."
"That comes of teaching the young Hydia how to shoot," said the sergeant proudly. Sir Ector
kissed the boys, and commanded the Scythian to be displayed before him.
"Well," he exclaimed, "what a monster! We'll have him stuffed in the dining hall. What did you say his measurements were?" 82 inches from ear to ear. Robin said it might be a record. "We shall have to ride to the field."
"It is a rather good one, isn't it?" remarked Kay with studied calm.
"I shall have it set up by Roland Ward,"
Sir Ector went on in high delight.
"with a little ivory card with K's first anthrophagus on it in black letters and the date."
"Hurrah! Leave thy childishness," exclaimed the nurse. "Now, Master Art, my innocent, be off with thee to thy bed upon the instant. And thou, Sir Ector, let thee think shame to be playing with monster's head like a godwit when the poor child stays upon the point of death. Now, Sergeant, leave puffing of thy chest. Stir, man, and take horse to Cardoyle for the chirurgeon." She waved her apron at the sergeant, who collapsed his chest and retreated like a shooed chicken. "It's all right," said the ward. "I tell you, it is only a broken collarbone, and Robin set it for me last night. It doesn't hurt a bit."
"Leave the boy, nurse,"
commanded Sir Ector, taking sides with the men against the women, and anxious to re-establish his superiority after the matter of the cudgel.
"Merlin will see to him if he needs it, no doubt. Who is this Robin?"
"Robin Wood!" cried both the boys together.
"Never heard of him."
"You call him Robin Hood," explained Kay in superior tones, "but it's Wood, really, like the wood that he's the spirit of."
"Well, well, well, so you've been foraging with the rascal. Come in to breakfast, boys. Tell me all about him."
"We've had our breakfast," said the ward, "hours ago. May I please take Wat with me to see Merlin?"
"Why, it's the old man who went wild and started rooting in the forest. Wherever did you get hold of him?"
The anthropophagi had captured him with the dog boy and Cabal. They were going to eat them, roasted.
"But we shot them,"
he put in.
"I shot 100. So now I want
So now I want to see if Merlin can restore him to his wits." "Master Art," said the nurse sternly. She had been breathless up to now on account of Sir Ector's rebuke. "Master Art, thy room and thy bed is where thou art tending to, and that this instant. Woodfuls may be woodfuls, whether by yea or by nay, but I han't served the family for 50 years without a learning of my duty. A fibbity-gibberting about with a lot of want-wits, when thy own arm may be dropping to the floor at any moment. Yes, thou word turkey cock," he added, turning fiercely upon Sir Ector, "and thou canst keep thy magician away from the poor mite's room till he's rested, that thou canst. Wantoning with monsters and lunaticals," continued the victor as she led her helpless captive from the stricken field. "I never heard the like." "Please, someone tell Merlin to look after Waltz," cried the victim over his shoulder in diminishing tones. "Papagayes indeed," they heard her concluding. "Oh, give him papagayes." The wart woke up in his cool bed feeling better. The dear old fire-eater who looked after him had covered the windows with a curtain so that the room was dark and comfortable, but he could tell by the one ray of sunlight which shot golden across the floor that it was late afternoon. He not only felt better, he felt very well indeed, so well that it was quite impossible to stay in bed. He moved quickly to throw back the sheet, but stopped with a hiss at the creak or scratch of his shoulder, which he had forgotten about in his sleep. Then he got out more carefully by sliding down the bed and pushing himself upright with one hand, shoved his bare feet into a pair of slippers, and managed to wrap a dressing gown round him more or less. He padded off through the stone passages, up the worn circular stairs to find Merlin. When he reached the schoolroom, he found that Kay was continuing his first-rate education. He was evidently doing dictation, for as Wart opened the door, he heard Merlin pronouncing in measured tones,
Saint presentes futuri quod,
and Kay saying,
wait a bit, my pen has gone all squeegee. You'll catch it, remarked Kay when he saw him. You're supposed to be in bed, dying of gangrene or something.
Merlin, said the Wart, what have you done with what?
You should try to speak with assonances, said Merlin. For instance, the beer is never clear near here, dear, is unfortunate even as an assonance. And then again, your sentence is ambiguous, to say the least of it. What, I might reply, taking it to be a conundrum. Or if I were King Bellamore, what? Nobody can be too careful about their habits of speech.
Kay had evidently been doing his dictation well, and the old gentleman was in good humor. You know what I mean, said the Wart. What have you done with the old man with no nose?
He's cured him, said Kay. Well, said Merlin, you might call it that, and there again you might not. Of course, when one has lived in the world as long as I have, and backwards at that, one does learn to know a thing or two about pathology, the wonders of analytical psychology and plastic surgery are, I am afraid, to this generation but a closed book.
He leaned back in high delight. What did you do to him?
Oh, I just psychoanalyzed him, you know, said Merlin grandly. That, and of course I sewed on a new nose on both of them.
What kind of a nose? Asked the Wart.
It's too funny, said Kay. He wanted to have the Scythian's nose for one, but I wouldn't let him. So then he took the noses off 2 young pigs, which we're going to have for supper, and used those. Personally, I think they'll both grunt. A ticklish operation, said Merlin, but a successful one.
Well, said Wart doubtfully, I hope it will be all right. What did they do then?
They went off to the kennels together. Old Wat is very sorry for what he did to the dog boy, but he says he can't remember having done it. He says that suddenly everything went black, and they were throwing stones once, and he can't remember anything since. The dog boy forgave him and said he didn't mind a bit. They are going to work together in the kennels in future and not think of what's past anymore. The dog boy says that the old man was very good to him while they were prisoners of the anthropophagy, and that he knows he ought not to have thrown stones at him in the first place. He says he often thought about that when the other boys were throwing stones at him.
Well, said the Wart, I'm glad it's all turned out for the best. Do you think I could go and visit them?
For heaven's sake, don't do anything to annoy your nurse, exclaimed Merlin, looking about him anxiously. That old woman hit me with a broom when I came to see you this afternoon and broke my spectacles. Couldn't you wait till tomorrow?
On the morrow, Wat and the dog boy were the firmest of friends. Their common experiences of being stoned by the mob and then sacrificed by cannibals served as a bond and a topic of reminiscence as they lay among the dogs at night for the rest of their lives. and by the morning they had both pulled off the noses which Merlin had so kindly given them. They explained that they had got used to having no noses now, and anyway, they preferred to live with dogs.